pillar back into the core of the earth, and I felt secure as long as I held onto the tree. Lightning strikes all around, thunderclaps. 1 second between a lightning strike and a thunderclap, you knew it was coming closer and closer. I was terrified that I wouldn't survive. And through this terrific experience, terrifying and terrific at the same time, I'm up in this tree and I'm saying, well, what should I focus on? And I said, well, Stamets, you're not stupid, but you stutter all the time. And so I thought, I need to stop stuttering. And so I said to myself, stop stuttering. Stop stuttering now. A little inner voice in my head. Do you hear me? Stop stuttering now. And then I started saying that, stop stuttering now, stop stuttering now. Hundreds, thousands of times. After the storm had passed, I came down from the tree, drenched, soaked to the bone, in love with life, with nature, in love with that tree. That tree was so important to me. And I went home and I went to bed. I didn't see anybody. And the next morning I woke up and there was a really attractive lady that I liked a lot. But I could never stare at her in the eyes because I was afraid to stutter and embarrass myself. So better to avoid social contact than have social contact, even though I was really attracted to her. And she liked me, but I didn't know what to do with it, with that attention. And so she was walking past me and she looked at me and she said, "Good morning, Paul." And for the first time, I looked her straight in the eye and I said, "Good morning, how are you?" And I stopped stuttering in one session.
Scrooge, rabbit horde.
This is the newest thing my employees are listening to. So my employees are our best source of new music. We love loud music with the mushrooms in the laboratories. It causes everyone to be synchronized. We have a lot of nonverbal communication in the laboratories. You're not allowed to talk because your mouth spreads bacteria. So we try to minimize talking. So a lot of it is done by gestures and knowing. So why not have loud music? My dad was a businessman. I swore I'd never become one. But I wanted to be independent. So I created a little mail order business in order to supply myself and other people who had like interests in mushrooms. When we started a business, it was extremely difficult back then. We didn't have the resources. We were pulling little advertisements in Organic Gardening magazine, back when there's only 3 television stations. I invented this business so I could buy equipment for my laboratory wholesale. Amazing to me, we have nearly 100 employees and thousands of media outlets. These mushrooms were so powerful to me that I realized that I wanted to study them. This mushroom is known as reishi, or ling chi, the mushroom of immortality. And it's one of the most amazing and interesting mushrooms that we've ever grown. This mushroom helps the immunity of not only people, but bees. Up this hill here, we have a quarter section of property, 160 acres, and we have a large mycological experiment. We planted 33,000 trees, half with mycorrhizal fungi attached to the roots, half without. This is year 9, so we are putting into an Excel spreadsheet, or have put in 1,100 trees to compare the treatments. I came into a chunk of change from licensing one of my patents, and so when the political climate in the United States changed to be adverse to environmentalists, we bought land in Canada.
I think the fact that he didn't come up on a conventional academic pathway is part of the reason he's as willing to really explore ideas that are not on anyone else's radar. I'm really honored that I discovered a few things that no one else had yet discovered. So I have now 5 patents on entomopathogenic fungi. These are fungi that infect insects
and in particular termites. The biggest problem in the commercialization of biopesticides from fungi has been the spore repellency property. The insects avoid the spores of these fungi. In fact, so concerned are termites that if a worker goes out and encounters this fungus, when the worker returns back to the nest, guards, and they'll capture that worker that's infected with these spores, take the worker to a graveyard, and they cut off the worker's head, and then the two guards commit suicide. They try to protect the queen and the nest and the colony from infection. And I discovered something that no one else had ever reported in the scientific literature. I found a biological switch that delayed sporulation, and then the insects were not repelled, but they were super attracted, which means one finds the fungus now and others follow. It ends up being a Trojan horse. The same fungi now are taken past the guards, given to the queen feeds it to the brood, the whole colony becomes like mummified with this mycelium, and whoosh, the whole colony is infected and dies. And then the spore repellency properties protects your house from subsequent invasions. This is a huge discovery. Then I tried it with carpenter ants, with fire ants, fungus gnats, and then mosquitoes. And now we're working with bed bugs, and we've had successes across the board. The entire ecosystem is infused with fungi. So I see these as deep reservoirs of the ecology all around us.
In a world of invention, the answer to our greatest problems may be hiding right under our feet.
There are mushrooms that have been used in Western medicine. Penicillin, for example, is a really effective antibiotic. Before it was synthesized during the Civil War, when a soldier would get wounded, they would slap a piece of moldy bread on his wound to benefit from those antibiotic properties, so he wouldn't get an infection.
Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1927. The problem was that they couldn't find strains that could be commercialized, that could produce enough of it in a commercially economic fashion. We fast forward, and in 1942, a group of researchers in Chicago went shopping, and a lab assistant found a cantaloupe that was rotting with a beautiful golden mold. And from that strain, we got the first hyper-producing strain of Penicillium. Penicillin literally saved tens of thousands of soldiers' lives. The Brits had this, but the Germans and the Japanese did not. It's been suggested that the discovery of this hyper-producing strain of penicillin was a significant influence in winning World War II. Alexander Fleming then received the Nobel Prize in 1945 in recognition of the huge impact that penicillin had on human health.
Here's how medicinal mushrooms are thought to work. A fungus will produce all kinds of enzymes. It's like a chemical warfare in order to fight off competition for food, like other microbes, other fungi, bacteria, virus. That's what makes antibiotics work. Chemicals that are produced by fungus, like the one that penicillin is made from, the fungus produces it to kill bacteria that are competition, and when we take penicillin, it kills our bacteria.
There's a long tradition of using mushrooms as medicines in East Asia, especially in Korea, China, and Japan. They appear to be able to enhance and protect the body's innate defensive mechanisms. The uses for them fill niches for which we really don't have anything in Western pharmacology. In Western medicine, all of our effort is on identifying agents of disease and eliminating them. That has its place, but we do almost nothing about supporting the good.
Shamans would treat patients, and the diseases were thought to be elements of the spirit world. Well, physicians today treat infections, and their spirits are bacteria that are pathogenic or viruses. So whether the shamans call them spirits or whether the scientists call them microbes, with the invention of microscopes, we get to see the microscopic universe and landscape that we thunder upon with every footstep. The fact that these fungal networks are seemingly invisible, but then represent themselves in a big flourishing mushroom in a matter of a few days, give us a window into the invisible landscape underneath our feet. Fungal networks have defended themselves against vectors of disease for millions of years. Viral pandemics occur periodically. Between 1347 and 1353, 1/3 of the European population died from the Black Plague. The Great Flu pandemic of 1918, 2% of the world population died. Millions upon millions of people. I think everyone is aware of the threat of bioterrorism, but few people may know that Europeans were actively involved, consciously or unconsciously, in bioterrorism against indigenous peoples, especially in the New World in Mesoamerica. They brought in diseases, and when you're extremely sick, you can't fight off an invader. It's an irony of history that now the US government is interested in protecting people from viral pandemics.
Paul Stamets cultured numerous strains in his lab and prepared natural extract. He then submitted samples to the Defense Department's BioShield program for testing.
And ironically, I have a debt of gratitude to Dick Cheney and George W. Bush.
It is vital that our nation discuss and address the threat of pandemic flu now.
Their funding of that research led to some very novel discoveries, which we're still elaborating today. What we know about these mycelial networks is they're learning membranes. They are self-learning and network-based organisms that can share and store knowledge. The mycelium is vaccinating itself against pathogens in the ecosystem. We can capitalize on this because many of the same bacterial pathogens that infect fungi also can infect animals. We found novel molecules highly active against pox viruses, novel molecules highly active against HPV, the human papillomavirus. Many scientists are trying to come up with the next antibiotic, the next penicillin. But we have barely tapped into the fungal genome, especially the mushroom-forming fungi. Think of it. Our old-growth forests that contain these ancient fungi are deep reservoirs of potential compounds that can fight pandemic viruses. We should save the old-growth forests as a matter of national defense.
I recommend mushrooms and mushroom products frequently to patients, and I teach other doctors about their uses. Mushrooms have molecules not found elsewhere in nature. There's some that have totally unusual properties, like lion's mane mushroom.
The lion's mane mushroom is a globular, cascading, icicle-formed mushroom. It tastes like lobster or shrimp when you cook it, but a researcher in Japan by the name of Kawagishi discovered it in around 1993. And I don't have the foggiest idea how he discovered this, but he discovered that this mushroom stimulates nerves to regrow. And he postulated it could be an effective treatment against Alzheimer's.
Since we don't have anything for Alzheimer's, and since this is non-toxic, we should test it. Mushrooms are completely unusual organisms, and they're ignored by so many people, and yet they're a vital interface between all forms of life.
At the University of Southern Florida, a very interesting study came out. Mice were trained to have a conditioned fear response. And so when there's a sound that's associated with a pain, later on when they just heard the sound, they cowered in fear. When they treated the mice with psilocybin, the compound in magic mushrooms, the mice dissociated that link. The mice overcame the fear-conditioned response.
We started with very low doses to as high a dose as 1 milligram per kilogram. Now, what was interesting, if you look at double-labeled cells, in other words, the birth of new neurons, we saw an increase in neurogenesis.
Neurogenesis literally means neuro for nerves and genesis, rebirth or beginning of. The regrowing of neurons. They were not using the same neurological pathways they have in the past. This is really exciting because it means that the brain has a plasticity about it, is able to heal, is able to grow. It just needs the right compounds to help it develop new neurological pathways. We're all getting old.